Well, hello and welcome to an LSI coaching conversation. We have Dr. Jim Smith, as well as myself, Michael Wallace of Leadership Systems. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, as we are all in this season a little more remote than we typically would be. And before we get into the conversation about connection, I want to let you know, in case you hadn't already heard, we have an online, a virtual Master Coach seminar coming up April 9th from 10 to 12 Eastern Time. This is content that we've been training on people on for years and years and years. It's very foundational for doing executive coaching. So maybe you're looking at coaching as something that in the past hasn't necessarily been on your radar, but right now, as we're all way more remote than we typically are, and we're walking through a future and circumstances that are really unknown, perhaps you're looking at coaching as something that you really do need in this moment. Or perhaps you've kind of delved into the coaching a little bit, but you are now looking at, you want to be trained and certified through a really good process with an organization that's been around for a really long time. We would also offer our virtual Master Coach seminar for you as well. What we've done is we've taken lots and lots of content and compressed it down into just two hours of training. It's all done virtual. You can watch it from wherever you're watching this video, on a mobile device, in your home, in your car, hiding from your kids, whatever the situation is that you're facing right now, you can do this training. So it's only 2 hours, a much reduced price compared to what we typically do for an on-site leadership training. You can get more information at leadershipsystems.com/MCS, and that way you can go ahead and register right there, and it will be April 9th, 10 to 12. We're excited to take this virtual, although we've been doing remote stuff for years and years and years.
You know, Michael, you're right. We've been virtually coaching since 1992 here at Leadership Systems. And so, whether it's the phone or doing some video, we've been doing this pretty consistently. So it's not new for us. But for today, it seems more needed than ever. And we wanted to invite you into the process to see if you could learn a little bit more about that and make it applicable to your own scenario and situations.
Absolutely. And so on the vein of remoteness, we're talking a little bit today about the value of connection. We're all a little bit more distant from others, and many of us are doing this work from home thing in this season right now more than we even have tried to in the past. So there's some things that kind of come out of that, working from home, being isolated, being remote, that really connect with the way that we view coaching at Leadership Systems, the way we view interaction and leadership through Leadership Systems. So we have the Master Coach right here, Dr. Tim Smith, to have a bit of a coaching conversation. So thanks for joining us for this today. Our first question, just to kind of kick around, is as the world has become a little more isolated, and we've seen this trend over the years leading up to now, but certainly over this very short period of time, the world has become more isolated. Why is connection important? Why does this concept matter?
Michael, great question. And connection, as you can imagine, is, as Michael said, critical for any coaching relationship. But, whether you're an extrovert that just likes to be connected and interacting with people, or whether you're more of an introvert, I believe that humans were designed to be in relationship. They were designed to have interaction, to have meaningful connections. And so that extrovert, what's really important, and I'm one of us, extroverts sometimes only think well as we speak. And so to create an idea, to really develop it well, we have to get it out there and hear it. And we kind of, even sometimes accused of, thinking as we're speaking, and sometimes thinking without, speaking without thinking. But anyway, it takes a relationship to really help that work. I know between you and I, as we work on projects, I sometimes can verbalize something and you can take it to so much better result than I could have even imagined, and then you kick it back and I might add a little bit to it. So being in a relationship has allowed us to co-create and to really have value. So without that relationship, you get a little less product, maybe no product at all. Also for the introvert, it's often said that the introvert does still need connection, but sometimes smaller groups, a little bit more close ties, intimacy. They're very extroverted, but also in smaller groups, and they need that connection as well. They might not seem to like it as much, but in these particular isolated times, I'm hearing my introverted clients say, I really miss my friends. I'm really missing my close circle. And so they are having a difficult time as well. because that connection just isn't there. So we see it a lot. It's critical. But for the coaching process specifically, connection is critical because I've often said if there's no connection, there's no coaching. If we don't make that trusted, a little bit deeper connection with that individual, if they don't believe that we have really come to hear them, to be present with them, to really understand what they're going through, there can be no real valid interaction in a coaching way. So we see it as a real critical thing. We're designed for it, and without it, it's going to be a real tough scenario.
Without it, it's a tough scenario. Let's talk a little bit. What happens if we ignore connection with others? There are people maybe that are doing this work from home thing and thinking, well, I'm just going to be extremely productive. I'm going to go knock out a to-do list, and our garages across the country have never looked cleaner. But what happens if we really, for a long term, ignore this value of connection?
Well, it's a good question because if there's too much ignoring of connection, I think for one, people's well-being will be in question or in jeopardy. Possibly depression for some people, maybe just less focus, less productivity, less value to the organization, and even to their home and family. They can have that impact if they're not having a healthy amount of connection with one another. But in the corporate space, it would be idea generation. As I was talking about our example, if we're not having these meetings, be it corporate meetings, hallway meetings, or just the phone interactions, if we're not doing that effectively, there's less idea result. And that's, I think, critical not only for the how we're going to monetize that next idea to the next product, but how we'll get real true synergy as we work together. Some of my most senior clients, we're really working on this notion of co-creating together. And as a coach, if I can pull and help them co-create that next thought and that next idea, it's really a beautiful thing because after all, they're the experts in their field and their organization, and I'm just there as a coach to help them think about it and frame it, and I'd really like them to co-create. So that connection is critical for the relationship, that's critical for the co-creation, and that's critical for the results and the monetized income that would come from that idea. So to not have it, you get lack of productivity, lack of well-being, lack of emotional health, and certainly to have it, you get trust, you get results, you get relationship, and you get enjoyment in the workplace, which I think we're seeing suffer as well in this time of less connectivity and greater isolation.
Absolutely. There's so much value that can come from the shared experience. As you said, not just the high productivity creation of things, but just the interactive way that we as humans need to operate. You have a shared experience that may have nothing to do with work, but it really translates into productivity because of the interpersonal nature of those experiences. So as executive coaches, and many people who are watching this may see themselves as executive coaches, or maybe even just see that their management or leadership of people in this season of life certainly should be as a coach. How do you seek to include connection in interactions with clients and with teammates?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. You know, this is the practical part of our time together, and so we have a few tried and true methods that we're happy to share with you. We can always share with you more if you'd like to engage with us, but one of my most favorites is people even kid me about sometimes is the scaling question. And so often, whether I get someone on the phone or when we can do person to person, I often ask people, how you doing, and what's the latest, and that sort of thing. And I ask them just what would they give in terms of a 1 to 10 scale, how they're doing today if 10 is the best. And I love to start out with that question. Very practical, very doable. What I found in doing that is, Michael, a lot of times people say, I'm doing about maybe a 7. A 7, 8, 9, 10, pretty good numbers, and usually we can move forward with those. But I've often told people anything that's a 6 or below, something's going on. And I know you can't always explore and be too personal about what's going on. They may want to share, they may want to not share, but really they've shared a little bit by simply giving you the number 6. They've opened up a little possibility of legitimacy to explore what's really going on. And so you might just ask them a second and maybe even a third question about that. Hey, anything that you like to share? Sounds like a 6, but it's not a good number I found, and they'll often really go a little bit further. So this comes out of this larger acrostic known as FORM, F-O-R-M, or you can play with those letters, F-R-O-M, if you like the word from better. But first is questions around family. I like to start with, how's it going? How's life? How's the family? As you know, most of us will simply hear from our colleague or our client, even on family member. We ask them how things are doing at home. They usually say great, or they'll say fine. The two classic standard answers, right? And yet I would never stop there as a coach. I might ask a scaling question at that point, or I might say, really, well, what is going on, and get them to talk a little bit about it. Some people, the stronger introverts, will be a little bit more hesitant to do that. Unless they welcome the specific question, then they might go deeper. And the extroverts usually love that question, and they might cause a different problem, which is talk about it for too long. But other than that, all this is around connection, and it's kind of the first step in the process. But to complete that acrostic form, F is usually the first lead question. O is organization. So how's it going at work? I don't go into yet what I'd like to explore, talk to them about sort of professionally, but I'll say, hey, how's it going at work? How's the company? How's the project? How are things at your place of business? And usually they'll give me another fine or okay, right? They just, toss it off. And then not a lot is usually gained until you get to the R, which is recreation. And I love that question. It's my favorite one. I think there's gold in recreation. I simply say, hey, what have you done for fun lately? What'd you do last weekend? How about next weekend? What are you planning to do on your vacation this summer, if anybody gets a vacation this summer? So, as I ask them, what about R, recreation, that's generally where I start getting the truth. And you've experienced it, I know. We've talked about how's it going? Fine. How's the work? Great. So have you done anything for fun lately? Oh, they'll roll their eyes, they'll sigh a little bit if they're not doing well, and they might start opening up and talking about their lack of vacation, their overwork schedule, etc. So I've often, paused and thought, I wonder why recreation gives me so much. Well, my theory is either it's about the third or fourth question I've asked them, so it usually takes 3 more questions to get to the truth, or I've just shown a little bit more interest in the average person, and I've asked to connect in that space, and generally there's something a little bit more rich there that we can have a conversation about. We might even have a similar favorite team that we pull for. We might have similar kids' activities that we can chat about, and the doors just begin to open up. Trust seems to grow, connectivity seems to be engaged, and that becomes a good place to start. And then finally, M is mission, or what I call meaning. That's what we have to talk about. That's the last letter on the form acrostic, so that it gives us sort of a place to enter in about what we had to talk about today. So in coaching, it could be reviewing of the goals that we talked about before. It could be challenging them to a little bit different behavior, moving the bar, doing something even bigger, better than they've done before, whatever the coaching goal might be. Usually it settles in very nicely if I've done those other preliminary questions. So in essence, it's around questioning, and it's around intentional questioning with a little bit of a strategy, a couple of questions in your pocket that you can pull out and put on the table. That's one of the fastest ways that we find it healthy to address deeper connections, to stay in the questioning mindset, having an intentional plan, pulling from the individual what is significant to them, and that opens the door for a better relationship.
I love the way you just said that. It's one of the fastest ways to get to connection. Because I think what we often see when we talk about the value of connection with people who are in business, it's like, that's a great thing, but I don't have time for it. I understand that connection is important, but I don't have time to sit down and have a 45-minute conversation about how my employees are feeling right now. There's too much to do. We're stressed. We're underwater. Those tools, that scaling and form, are, I think, great ways to kind of speed up the process without feeling like you're rushing the conversation.
Yes.
Because it gets straight to the point without going, glassy-eyed and just, asking questions without really caring what the answer is. The way that you structure those can really feel like you're getting there quickly without trying to bulldoze through the connection.
It's a tremendous point, because I know many people hearing this might say, Jim, I don't have time. Michael, I don't have time to do all these questions. Actually, we're talking about seconds, maybe minutes, not too many. But also it's the most efficient way to get there, because you can often back up if you don't do it. Here's what I mean. We can often say, hey, can we talk about X? You can go right to the project. If we go too soon to the mission to talk about X without exploring how they're doing and showing a little bit of personal interest, how might they feel about us in that given moment when we say, hey, come here, how about X? How might they feel, you think, in that moment?
Probably feel like they're on the sidelines, but the mission is more important than they are.
Yeah, and that moment of devalued erodes trust, makes them feel like they're only a project, makes them feel like you're really not caring about them as an individual, so motivation sinks. I mean, you've really backed up rather than move forward. And so you don't need to get their total life story and hear about everybody's family illness or whatever might, come to the table. So I'm often asked at this point, well, Jim, how do you stop that? I'm just not going to do this method because I'm fearful it's going to take more time. And, I've just got this quick call. And I'll say to them, if you know you're going to be engaging a real talker, if you know that up front, you might say, hey, I'd love to grab just about 2-3 minutes and make an interactional connection here and talk about general questions before we get into the project. Are you okay with that? I've got about 2-3 minutes to do about that. So you kind of box it, put it in a little bit of a frame, and so the person that tends, or he or she may tend to go on about anything, you've given them a little bit of a framework. So as they get onto the second or third story, you might say, hey, time out, I appreciate getting to hear about, the kids' hockey experiences, and they're wonderful. But if you don't mind, remember I mentioned we have to get on into our target today. Generally they say, oh yeah, I'm sorry, and they're good about it. You already framed it, you told them what you wanted to do, you had a little interaction, and then you've already prepped the way to get on into the mission, and they'll tend to go with that pretty well. If you don't set the framework though, it is a dilemma, because at some point, your mind's editing and thinking, I've got to get onto this, the clock's ticking and time's wasting, and I know how frustrating it is. That's the number one reason people don't do it. The fear that they will get trapped or they'll get off into some topic they didn't want to get into, so they kind of leave all that stuff at home. The problem with leaving it at home is the person happened to bring their whole selves to work that day. I know you just wanted the performer and the salesperson or the technician or whatever you've hired, but they did in fact bring their whole selves to work. The reason I love to go a little deeper is oftentimes something they'll put on the table during that connection time I can leverage toward the end of the conversation. For example, I'd say, now that we've finished up our talk today and we've gotten really clear on what the goals for the sale or goals for the month might be, it makes me think back. You mentioned earlier you were really interested in taking that big vacation. I'm just wondering if you see any connection between hitting this goal and the potential bonus that could result from that and that vacation you told me about at the beginning of our talk. I've seen the most amazing things at that point. Sometimes people go, yeah, I could certainly use that bonus and apply it to that vacation. That's a great idea. They get all motivated, all excited, and all happy. And I'm just thinking, all I did was make the connection. And you say, oh, surely people make that connection. I question that. I think you as a manager, and you as a leader, you as a coach have made the connection. Seems obvious. You've thought about it. But the question is, have they? Have they connected the two, or does your job as a manager and a coach open up the door to bridge that gap and help them make the connection so that there's power, there's movement, there's motivation? That's one way to help it happen.
As I'm hearing you describe that, this really seems like the essence of coaching. Connection is so valuable, not just because it's a great first step and a vital first step to actually doing the work of coaching, but that process of making connections with the things that they're offering really is the essence of what we want to do as coaching people. It's really just pulling them from where they are to where they need and want to be, and helping be that mirror that points out, here's the things you're saying. Often people say things, they don't even realize that they're saying things that could be or should be connected, and so connection really gives some great strength towards that process.
Absolutely. Coaching, as you know it and as I've experienced it, is framing. Coaching is, as you said, beautiful metaphor, holding the mirror so that they get a better look, they make that connection, they see it in a different perspective. And it's just, as I've often said, it is the first step, Michael, you're right, of our model, connection. Because without the connection, there can be no coaching. It just is just the frontal, the piece, the gate, the critical first step. So it's just so important. There are other practical ways that we have worked with this. One even president said years ago, that never before have we had so many communication devices, but so little connection. That we have all these modern ways, right, to interact and just multiply our connection, but is it really there? Or in reality, are we maybe less connected as humans, really looking in each other's eyes, really listening to the issues and not rushing on or just doing it in a technological way? Never before have we had so much capacity to connect, but somehow we're failing to have that real human connection. That's what we're talking about in coaching, is not just sending an email or asking a question on a telephone, but really hearing and responding appropriately so that that person feels really heard. And in that point, they tend to go to a little bit deeper place. I call it elevated thinking. If we can appropriately hear them and mirror back, sometimes rephrase back what they've said and helping them come to some other solutions, they often just go to this real creative, elevated place in their mind. I call it thinking at a higher level, or thinking at a higher connectivity with their own thoughts. And they'll often pause in the middle of the time and say, that's a good thought. What I really need to do is, and they'll tell me something, and I'm always a little bit more surprised than they are, because I don't even know what they just connected, and I'm fascinated. They'll often say, Jim, that was a good thought, or that was a good point. And I'll often say, kind of in jest, I'll say, that's funny, I don't remember making a point, or I didn't say any good thoughts. It's what's going on in your mind that made that thought. That's when you know you're in the sweet spot of coaching, is that individual is working and making some fresh connections, and they heard it as a point that they made in their own head. That's really fun stuff.
That's great, because they get to carry their voice with them forever, and a coaching interaction may only be a few minutes.
Right.
So anything we can do to help them make connections with their own voice, that's a long-term win.
And it's owned, and it's empowering, and it's motivational, and as you just said, it's never forgotten, and that makes it really long-term.
Well, let me ask you one follow-up question.
Sure.
We're in this season of, I feel like there's stress at a level that culturally we haven't felt ever. Perhaps maybe wartime stress is the way that it feels, certainly since we've been years away from World War. When you talk about a scaling question for connection, is there anything that is adjusted in that as we're in this season? Like you typically say 6, 7 is kind of that line. If it's 6 or below, then there's a red flag. Is there anything that's adjusted as we look at, we're all stressed, everyone's feeling the impact of what's happening with crisis going on? Do you scale your scale at all as a reflection of that? Or do you think those numbers kind of stay the same? Is there any adjustments you make based on where we are?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to put it back in your case, in your court for a moment.
Excellent coaching.
Because I think you've actually given some thought to that. I do have one initial thought, but what are your thoughts on that before I share mine?
My thought in asking that question is when we go to scale, we're trying to figure out where the line is, kind of a tripwire of recognizing, they're not in a regular managed stress place. They're in a more of a red flag. This is too much. My initial thought is perhaps we look at maybe not changing the scale, but on the front end, prefacing the scale with, hey, I get we are all in a really difficult place. Yeah. We're all, everything seems askew right now. Taking all those things in consider, what number would you say between 1 and 10? So maybe framing it a little bit differently than normal.
I like that. I would say, maybe in a stressful time, drop the scale a little bit. Some more significant numbers would probably be 3s, 4s, and maybe 5s. I will say this, regardless of how modulated your scale is, if you hear the numbers 1 or 2, it's not a perfect diagnosis for depression or for alarm, but I would say, in my own experience, that's when I've been fairly quick to drop the agenda for the day. What I call land the helicopter there with that individual, sort of walk around with them a little bit and say, wow, that sounds really heavy. Now let's talk about that for a few moments and see if they're just being super honest about having a bad couple days, or they're really in a tailspin sort of scenario, or a really more desperate scenario. And just for most of the coaches already know this in terms of our profession, there's certainly wisdom in knowing when to refer. And so if someone either gives me a super low number or on a consistent basis gives me a low number, I'm going to be quick to sort of refer them to a counselor, maybe a health professional that could be more specific, maybe a pastor, maybe a good friend that really could help them go deeper than maybe a professional coaching relationship. So if they give a low number or consistently give a low, I'm going to refer. And, encourage them and follow up with them to see if they made some progress. And I often say something like this to make it very practical. I often say, well, that's a pretty low number. I know the times that I've had those low numbers myself, and I was just wondering if you've ever considered taking some time to talk with someone more significantly at a deeper level, maybe a friend, a pastor, a counselor in that regard. Often they'll hesitate or push back a little bit, and if they do that, I'll say, I've certainly done that in my own life on several occasions, and I found it very useful. And I think if this continues to be an experience where you're feeling that kind of pressure, angst, something you may want to consider. And even if it's just significant talk with a close friend, someone that you really know that you can be particularly open with, that might be able to move that number. And so next time we chat, I'm going to ask them the same question, see if that number's moving, making a little bit more progress, or maybe you've been helpful in that you've been able to diagnose something that does need some attention. So that's a very good question. How to scale it in these times? Yes, maybe a little bit lower, maybe explain your scale and see what kind of interaction they'll give you. It's a powerful little question. I've been using it for about 30 years.
And it may also be helpful to remember that the scaling is very specific to the individual. There's not some perfect person who's at a 10 every day and we're comparing to them. It's this conversation versus the next conversation. How can we move the needle a little bit? If you're at a 5 now, we're going to get to a 6 by the next time, or an 8 by the next time. But it's not comparing to some other person out in space. It's all very focused on the individual.
Well said. And keep in mind, your salespeople will always be a 9 or a 10. If they're really good, they'll be a 12. And that just goes with the nature of that high energy. So even for a real motivated person, to come down a few numbers is very significant, because they would rarely want to admit that they're even trending toward an 8. That'd be a little low number for them. But generally speaking, you're going to see people give you a very positive 7, 8, 9, or 10. Or again, if it's significant, you'll see it be about a 6 or below. So watch out for those super low numbers. But again, that's just all in the area of connecting if things are maybe super stressed.
Well, this has been fantastic. As we've had this great coaching conversation, we'd really love to have you guys who are watching this video also participate. So we've got a couple of live webinars that will be coming up on Tuesdays in the future, and we'll have, it's going to be open webinar calls.
Join us.
You can join us. You can pop some questions in. We'd love to have kind of some back and forth Q&A. If you have questions, just as you're watching this interaction, you go, what about this? They didn't mention this, and I have this really specific thing that I'd love to have, and maybe other people would value. You can send those in via email right now, mwallace@leadershipsystems.com. Send in your questions, and then you can also have some live coming up. We'll have the more announcements on when the first one of those will be. We'd love for you to join us, as we're all kind of remote. So if you're looking for a point of connection, it could be a great way for you to feel some of that interactivity and have your questions answered by, of course, the master coach himself, but also to have a little bit of interface with other people who are looking to add to their coaching toolbox with a little bit more specific tips and that kind of stuff. So that will be coming up. Also, we have added another page to our website. There's a lot of stuff that you can go if you haven't been. Go to the website, leadershipsystems.com/virtual coaching. Also has some pre-packaged coaching packages that are really specific to process through the things that we're all kind of facing right now: crisis management, rebranding. How do you do specific things that our culture and our world right now are really valuing? So there's what we offer in those is just as we always do. It's executive coaching. It's really focused on you, the coachee, you, the participant. But we're structuring those packages to really meet the needs of these overarching themes that people are all tending to deal with right now. So check that out. We'll continue to add to that, leadershipsystems.com/virtual coaching. And don't forget, we've got our live virtual Master Coach Seminar coming up April 9th. You can register for that online as well, leadershipsystems.com/MCS. Registration is open right now for that. We'd love for you to join us. And thanks so much for participating in this conversation, watching it, and hopefully you've gotten some things out of this that were valuable. Jim, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Well done. Thanks for getting us this far, and thanks for joining us.